Hey YouTube, Freedom for Kaz here. Hey, what's going on out there? I hope you're doing well. I know I'm doing pretty good. Hey, I know I said I was going away for the weekend, but unfortunately at the last minute plans got changed and didn't end up going up north. So came back home, did some research, followed up on the comments that were made on my video about QE3 and is GM failing. And you know, it made me think about some things. I don't want to point out any one particular person, but today's video is about comments people make without understanding the subject matter. And I understand the beauty of YouTube is that you can get so many areas of conversation that come in different perspectives, and that's great. But sometimes people leave comments that you can just totally understand that either it's based on emotion or it's based on fact or it's based on the fact that they know nothing about the subject matter. Okay? Usually it's one of those three things. And today's video is about the one that's made on emotion and the one that's made on they know nothing about what they're talking about and they think that they do. Okay? The subject matter is a lot of people don't understand QE3 or what quantitative easing means. They don't understand how it applies to them personally. They don't understand what it does to them financially. And also, another thing that they don't understand is how it can be done and they not realize it's being done to them. So the biggest factor is on QE3 is your wage, how much money you make. And the big question always is, why is it the rich get richer and the poor get poorer? That's really easy to understand, and that's a real easy answer if you take the time to research, do your own homework, and understand what's going on. Now I'm going to go over this really quick, and there's a video I want you to watch, and it's a great video about wages and inflation and how the two interact, and it's a government video that basically deceives you into thinking that you are doing better than what you actually are. But after watching the video, I'm going to point out a couple things that prove this video is a lie, bold-faced lie, right to your face. But first of all, let's talk about wages really quick. Wages in America, the rich get richer and the rest get less. Stagnant workers' wages. In 1979, the American workers' average hour wage was $15.91, adjusted to the inflation rate in 2001 US dollars. By 1989, it had reached only $16.63 an hour, and that was a gain of only 7 cents against the rate of inflation a year for the entire Reagan decade. But things get worse. By 1995, it had risen only to $16.71 per hour, or virtually no gain whatsoever over the next 6 years versus the rate of inflation from 1989 to 1995. During this great boom year between 1995 and 2000, it rose briefly to $18.33 per hour. In other words, from 1979 to 2000, even before the most recent Bush recession, after more than 2 decades of the American workers' wage increased an average of only 11.5 cents against the rate of inflation. This is why we don't get anywhere, people, and this is why you need to do your homework. These articles are on the internet as long as you take the time to research it and understand what's going on. Okay? Here's another article, and the links will be underneath. Do your own research. Okay? College graduates, starting salaries are down 10% from a decade ago. Recent college graduates are making 8 to 11% less than they did 10 years ago. To the graduating class of 2012, all the money that you and your parents have spent or borrowed to pay for your tuitions in the past years is not getting the same return on investment as it did a decade ago. According to the folks at the Economic Policy Institute, the average inflation-adjusted wage for a male graduate aged 23 to 29 is only $21.68 per hour. This is an 11% decline over the last 10 years. And the reason why this is going on is because of the bailout, the QE3s, and this is how the quantitative easing affects you. It creates inflation. It creates the increase of prices in goods and services. Okay? The links are underneath. Do your own homework. I'm not going to read everything out to you. The middle class is broke. Pew's study reveals the real problem with the economy. One of the most important stories in the U.S. economy these days is the rise of extreme inequality. Over the past 30 years, a large proportion of Americans' income growth has gone to those in the top 10% of incomes, especially those in the top 1% of income. This is a major change from 60 years ago, in which the top 10% and the bottom 90% shared in equal income gains. Again, the link is underneath. Do your own homework and understand what's going on. Alright? You know, people want to blame unions, and they want to blame corporations, and they want to blame all this other stuff on what's going on. And I'm not saying that that's not wrong. That is correct. But I want you to watch this video, and then I'm going to point out to you what's wrong with this video.
In a recent video with over 1 million views, former Labor Secretary Robert Reich gives a 3-minute description of the truth about the economy. One of his key points is that, adjusting for inflation, most people's wages have barely increased since 1980. Based on this claim, Reich argues several other controversial points about how the U.S. economy is in bad shape. But I think this claim about average wages demands closer scrutiny. If true, such wage stagnation would indeed be a serious indictment of the U.S. economy over the past 3 decades. Fortunately, Reich's claim is based on a statistic too faulty to take at face value. If you care about this issue, you need to consider also, 1, how inflation is calculated, 2, the benefits other than wages that workers receive, and 3, the distinction between statistics and flesh and blood individuals. Let's look first at inflation. Adjusting for inflation, especially over long periods of time, is as much an art as it is science. Economists have developed several different methods for calculating inflation, each of which is considered legitimate, but which yield different results. It's true that the calculated average hourly wage, adjusted for inflation using the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, hasn't risen much over the past 30 years. That's the basis of Reich's claim. But what about the other methods for adjusting for inflation, methods no less respected than the CPI? As recent research from the Minneapolis Fed shows, using an index called the Personal Consumption Expenditure Deflator results in average hourly earnings rising by 10% between 1976 and 2006, rather than falling by 4% when adjusted with the CPI. Another widely respected inflation adjuster, the GDP deflator, finds that real average hourly earnings rose even more over those years, by 18%. And those are just 2 of the other indices an economist could use. So I caution anyone against basing a firm conclusion on a statistic from a single index. One reason for the ambiguity in adjusting for inflation is that it's really difficult to account for improvements in the quality of goods and services. For example, a television in 2012 is a vastly superior product to one that you could buy in 1976. There's simply no scientifically agreed upon way to account for such quality changes when adjusting for inflation. My second point, fringe benefits that come with jobs, such as health insurance. While reasonable people can disagree about how best to measure inflation, no reasonable person disagrees that to accurately calculate workers' total compensation, all forms of compensation must be included, wages and salaries, as well as benefits. And because fringe benefits have become a larger share of workers' pay over the past 30 years, looking only at wages and salaries gives a false picture of the progress of worker compensation. For example, for the years 1976 through 2006, I estimate that the inclusion of benefits in worker pay results in average hourly wages rising by as much as 26%, depending upon the method used to calculate inflation. My third point is the most important. Robert Reich confuses statistical categories with real people. When Reich says that since 1980 most people's wages have barely increased, he gives the impression that most people have enjoyed nearly no economic gains over the past 3 decades. What he means is simply that the average wage, adjusted for inflation with the CPI, hasn't gone up. But statistical results such as averages or medians can give a very misleading picture about what's happened to individuals included in those groups. Here's an example. Let's say that you annually keep track of the average height of your 3 kids. This year, their average height is, say, 4 feet 2 inches. Next year, you have a 4th child, and you calculate the average height again. The addition of that infant will lower your kid's average height, even though each of your first 3 kids have grown in height during the year. Clearly, you wouldn't conclude from the lower average height of your children that your children are shrinking in size. That would be absurd. But the same reasoning applies to average wages. The individuals behind the statistics have changed a lot since 1980. To name a few such changes. Workers like me have gained more skills and now earn higher pay. Others have retired, and others, very significantly, have joined the workforce for the first time. Especially noteworthy is the increasing rate at which women and immigrants have entered the workforce. These workers generally earn lower than average pay, which pulls the statistic down, but not necessarily the actual pay of actual people. Reich concludes by saying that a strong economy needs a strong middle class. He's got that right.
Okay, the video is done, and I'm glad that you watched it. At least I hope you watched the whole thing. Here are 2 major things that are wrong with this video. Number 1, the guy compares a TV made in 2012 that is much more advanced than a TV that was made in 1976. The comparison is misleading, nevertheless irrelevant, due to the fact that in 1976 TVs were still made in the United States, and TVs in 2012 are made in China. So the jobs lost in this sector were eliminated, and thus caused people to find new or different jobs in perhaps different job markets as well. So this is a misleading statistic, but the problem is that most of you folks don't even realize or forget to realize this is what's happened to America. And you just sometimes you get so caught up in the emotion of what's going on in your life that you it's a slip of the mind and you just make a comment. It's like, oh, it's this or that. Granted, I've been down that road. Okay, I lost my house in 2008. I know exactly what's going on. But it's because I lost my house is what's opened my eyes and given me the opportunity to become a smarter person and understand how the economy and government works. Here's another fault of this video that you just watched. Then the guy uses a family age structure as lowering a family's average age, in which is also misleading again. Those who have lost their jobs and found new jobs in different job markets have indeed taken pay cuts, and thus again lowers the average wage of the U.S. working force. This is a true statement against the video that you just watched. And then the last thing that I want to say is that a lot of people want to compare the economy from today to 5 years ago, today to 10 years ago, today to 15 years ago. You can't do that. And here's why. The only comparison you can make to today's economy is after the NAFTA agreement and before the NAFTA agreement, because the NAFTA agreement was a major change in the economic future of the United States. The NAFTA agreement is equal to that of the Patriot Act that happened on 9/11. They go hand in hand. The NAFTA agreement and the Patriot Act, each in their respective areas. The Patriot Act, the Patriot Act attacked freedom. The NAFTA agreement attacked the economy, especially in the middle and lower classes. And you put both of these things together and you have a huge problem. Okay? If you want to compare apples to apples, that's the only way you can compare the economy is after the NAFTA agreement and prior to the NAFTA agreement. That's it. Folks, have a good day. We'll see you next time, alright?